Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to get started just out of respect for those also waiting online. By way of introduction, my name is Yara Murad. I'm the Assistant Director at the Isam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. And it brings me great honor to be here at the side event to the 69th Commission on the Status of Women, introducing and moderating a really timely and important discussion on the Women, Peace and Security agenda in the Arab region. I would like to start first with thanking the partners and co-sponsors who made this event possible. Your Own Women, Regional Office for Arab States, the Isam Faris Institute at AAUP, the Swedish Dialogue Institute, the Arab Reform Initiative, Middle East Council on Global Affairs, the German International Cooperation Society, GIZ, Inclusive Peace, and the Spanish Agency for International Development Corporation. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. So the discussion will be in English today. The simultaneous interpretation is only available through Zoom by selecting the Arabic language. Should anyone in the room need interpretation, we please kindly ask you to join the Zoom link on your devices and then tune into the Arabic channel. I'll just repeat this in Arabic. النقاش اليوم حيكون باللغة الإنجليزية. ففي حال في حدا بالغرفة بحاجة للترجمة الفورية بنطلب منكم تفوتوا على الزوم لينك بالاي دي والباسكود الموجود على الأجندة. بفتكر في أجندة توزعت لتقدروا تسمعونا بالعربي. We will start with the opening remarks, followed by the panel and a Q&A session, and finally the closing remarks. So without further ado, it brings me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Moez Doraid, who is the Acting Regional Director for the Arab States at UN Women and the Director of Management and Administration at its headquarters. And to welcome him here for his opening remarks, please.
Thank you very much, Yara, and okay. Should I repeat? Yeah. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today, and I'm grateful to all of you for joining us. I know how the CSW events attract all of our attention and time, so we doubly appreciate your presence on this very important topic and discussion on the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda in the Arab States region. And we are delighted to host the discussion here at UN Women headquarters. Sincere thanks to our partners, GIZ, the Isam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs, the Swedish Dialogue Institute for the Middle East and North Africa, the Middle East Council on Global Affairs, and also the Inclusive Peace and the Arab Reform Initiative. We really appreciate the partnership that is bringing this event to fruition, and we look forward to working with you, with all the partners, and also with the participants towards impact at scale across the Arab region, aligned with the Women, Peace and Security agenda. I'd like to express gratitude to the Spanish Agency of International Cooperation for joining us today. And finally, in terms of thanks, to really thank Sarah Douglas and PIPSA for helping organize this. They did all the work, including my statement. So it's an important year and a milestone year for, of course, the 30th anniversary of Beijing, but also for Security Council Resolution 1325, its 25th anniversary. The resolution, for the first time, acknowledged not only the differential and devastating impacts of war and conflict on women and girls, but also women's power and agency in preventing conflicts and in negotiating peace and contributing to inclusive recovery and reconstruction. I think we are all hopeful that Arab countries that have suffered conflict, not only over the past 15 months, but over the past years and decades, are at the cusp of recovery and reconstruction. And there is certainly a central and integral role for women to play in peacemaking, peace building, and the aftermath. However, 25 years after the resolution, the UN Secretary's report last year on women, peace, and security paints an alarming picture. Armed conflict and militarization are on the rise. We just heard in the past 10 days, several key countries, global powers, increasing their arms budgets. At the same time, simultaneously, women's participation in peace processes is declining. Now, for some data to inform our discussion. In 2023, women accounted for only 9.6% of negotiators and 13.7% of mediators in peace agreements globally, and just 26.6% of signatories to peace and ceasefire agreements. And the share of peace agreements that referenced women and girls, or gender, or sexual violence dropped to 26%. Furthermore, funding for women's organization in conflict-affected countries is only 0.3% of bilateral aid globally. This is at a time and in contrast to the humongous global military spending, which reached $2.4 trillion, that is a 6.8% increase from the previous year. And despite all of our efforts, whether in substantiating the importance and value of women's participation, in advocating for it, and so on, despite all of this, the effect is not yet materializing. And in conflicts, women and girls continue to pay a high price. The most vulnerable among them, more so, widows. Just yesterday, the Minister of Women's Affairs of Palestine was telling me about really the shocking numbers of widows, not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank. Also women refugees, women with disabilities, as they face the compounding and intersecting inequalities, which underscored the criticality of gender-sensitive and targeted solutions for conflict response, for gender-responsive resolution of conflict and relief and recovery. Yet the narrative in the region that we are joined to talk about, to discuss, most often portrays women not as agents, but only as victims. And despite women being largely absent in formal negotiations and in decision-making in peace processes, let's really remember and let's tell the world that women in the region have been and remain at the forefront of grassroots peace building and local mediation efforts. And they play critical roles in building cohesive, peaceful communities across the region, in conflict countries and beyond. Our research at UN Women has underscored the vital role women play in negotiating humanitarian access, in mediating ceasefires, in preventing and resolving tribal conflicts, and engaging in cross-line negotiations to secure access to water and other vital resources that benefit not only women, but also their communities. And in MENA, UN Women has, over the last decade, been supporting and advocating for women leaders' meaningful participation in peace transition and recovery processes, precisely because we understand, we know that to obtain sustainable positive peace, benefiting all levels of society, it is essential that women are integral part of all decision-making processes before, during, and following conflicts. Just over the past month, I visited Damascus and met with the transitional authorities and with about 80 members of civil society organizations. And this was directly followed by the holding of the Syria Women Advisory Board that was held in Geneva with the participation of our executive director, Dr. Sima Bahous. And the top priority that we heard from all the scores of civil society partners and activists that we met, and also from government officials, is the prominence and top priority of societal peace. And I think the events just in the last few days in Tartus and Laziqiyah further underscore not only the urgency, but the immediacy of that and the necessity of women's involvement. It was so impressive to meet the members of the Women Advisory Board of Syria and also the civil society organizations, very active, extremely hopeful, and equally promising. As part of our work, UN Women, among our interventions across the region, has been supporting in collaboration with our dear partners, many of whom represented here. We have been working on the Women, Peace and Security working group for the region, that is the context. And this group provides fresh perspectives and new strategies for the implementation of the WPS agenda, including concrete recommendations. And I emphasize concrete, because we need to transform the talk into real action on the ground, impact that benefits. We have been doing that to an extent, but there is much ground to cover, and I hope the panel will discuss that. I hope these concrete recommendations coming from the Women, Peace and Security Working Group and from today's discussion from the expert panelists will provide guidance and direction on how to address the enormous challenges that we are facing in the Arab States region, but also to capitalize on the promise and the potential, particularly the promise of women's agency. So now more than ever, we must act collectively to achieve women's inclusive involvement in peace and security in this region and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Doraid, for the remarks that set a good base for our discussion today. Before we dive into the panel, I'd like to just take a moment to introduce you to the Sam Faris Institute at the American University of Beirut, and to let you know what the role we play in advancing the Women, Peace and Security agenda in the region. So the Institute is a leading policy research center committed to building the gap between knowledge and action. It brings together experts, policymakers, researchers to tackle some of the most pressing issues faced in Lebanon and the broader Arab world. From governance to climate change and, of course, peace and security, IFI works to produce evidence-based research that can inform policies and drive meaningful change. One of the flagship initiatives in the Institute is a WPS Regional Hub, and it serves as a dedicated space for research, advocacy, and collaboration on the WPS agenda. This hub was created in the support of UN Women Regional Office in response to many challenges women face in conflict and post-conflict settings in the region, where their roles in peacebuilding, political transitions, recovery efforts are often gone unrecognized. Through its work, the WPS Hub seeks to ensure that women's voices and leadership are at the center of discussions on peace and security. And it is within this framework that IFI, alongside UN Women, has convened the WPS working group that you have just mentioned, Dr. Doraid. And this is in collaboration with a cohort, with a cohort of regional partners, including GIZ, the Swedish Dialogue Institute, Middle East Council for Global Affairs, Frederick Ebert Stiftung, FES, and the Arab Reform Initiative. This working group brings together peace practitioners, academics, media personalities, private sector actors, policy experts, and others from the region to develop concrete recommendations on how to advance the WPS agenda with a focus on conflict-affected countries. And right now, the group is working on a white policy paper which aims to both guide the national and international actors on how to adapt WPS commitments to the realities of our region. This is a critical step in ensuring that women's participation in the peace processes is not just a box to tick, but a real and meaningful contribution to sustainable peace. It also ensures that the voices from the region are mainstreamed into the high-level WPS debates, which will be held along the course of the year. We will get the chance to reflect a bit on the white paper during the panel, especially that one of our working group members is actually a panelist, and we have others amongst us in the room. And we've also shared the draft executive summary with you today. It's on a QR code on the agenda that's passed around. If you don't have it, we can provide you with it. So with that said, I would like to get the conversation started and hear from our distinguished panelists about how to push this agenda forward. So I will introduce these incredible women and ask them to please be with me here. Just a small note that we will have a Q&A session at the end, so please save your questions till then. So I'll start with Mariam. Mariam Jalabi is the co-founder of the Syrian Women's Political Movement. She's also served as a representative of the Syrian Opposition Coalition to the United Nations in New York for over 13 years. And her work focuses on women's inclusion in politics and decision-making. Of course, I'm really summarizing the CVs. The CVs are a lot more impressive than what I'll manage to say today. Suzan Aref is a human rights and civil society activist, founder and director of Women Empowerment Organization. She works as a coordinator of the Alliance 1325, which is a large group of civil society organizations in Iraq, which had a pioneering role in developing the first national action plan on WPS. Hala Bugaighis, is that right? Is a Libyan lawyer, Bugaighis maybe, is a Libyan lawyer, activist, and researcher with extensive experience in Libya and the MENA region. In 2015, she co-founded the Jusur Center for Studies and Development, spearheading efforts to advance inclusive development, economic development in Libya. And Hala also launched LEAP, which is Libya's first women-focused business incubator. Her work focuses on integrating women's inclusion in peace processes and economic recovery strategies. With us online is Dr. Dalal Iriqat, who is an associate professor of diplomacy and strategic thinking at the Arab American University, Palestine, and a weekly columnist at the Al-Quds newspaper. Her research focuses on diplomacy, nation branding, Palestinian state building, coercive diplomacy, public diplomacy, soft power, mediation, and conflict resolution. And she is also a founding member of the Mediterranean Women Mediators. Unfortunately, Dalal could not be here in person, but she's with us online. And I'd like to reiterate how grateful we are for having you join us, Dalal, right after breaking fast. Thank you. So our first round of questions will be the same question that I'm going to address to all the panelists, and we'll give it around 3 to 4 minutes, please. So given the narrowing of civic space in the region and the growing reality of transactional politics, what are the most pressing challenges facing women peace actors today? How do these challenges differ from those faced when the WPS agenda was first adopted? Mariam, we can start with you.
Hi, and thank you for having me here. And thank you for the opening remarks, Dr. Moez, because it addressed a lot of the issues that I have been thinking about addressing today, and the notes that I have taken to myself, talking about how we live today in patriarchal structures where militarized systems take the precedence in importance and priorities everywhere we go in the world. And why I like to start with that is that Syria is no different in its way of how it's handling the regional complexities and the issues that it needs to deal with today than anywhere else in the world. The women in Syria face the same challenges and the same issues that are faced everywhere else in the world. When, as you said, it is very important that we remember numbers also. When we're talking about a very small budget that is spent on investment in women, when the budgets for military and the military industrial complex keeps building up and becoming stronger and stronger at a time when we're realizing as humanity, as people of the global south and north, that wars are no longer the way to solve problems. And this has been talked about over and over again. This is what brings me to the Syrian women's political movement when we started as Syrian women in 2017, when there was no light at the end of the tunnel from a dictatorship that had ruled Syria for 54 years. We came together and decided that we need to have a different solution for Syria. We need to work with the other women in the region. We need to work with women internationally and all believers in feminist work and feminist ideology, because feminist work and ideology is not just for women. It's actually to support men, get out of their ways of oppression and military use so that they can come on the same path with us, so that we can create a world where peace and security is the way to go. On December 8th, a 50-year-old dictatorship fell. I'm not going to go into the details of how that happened, but somehow we were the lucky result of a lot of geopolitical complexities that has brought the fall of a regime that nobody thought will come down. 2 years earlier, the whole Arab region, the whole international community was trying to normalize as a de facto presence of this regime that has killed and destroyed the country and created a huge refugee problem where the economy is down to the ground. That went away on December 8th. On January 8th, the Syrian Women Political Movement met in Damascus to announce our presence as the women political movement, that you cannot move forward in this country without real inclusion of women. And we had been supported by a lot of people and a lot of groups that have to come together to make this a reality. I'd go a little bit more into detail about what's happening in Syria right now, but I'll leave that for the next question. But I wanted to just point out that today Syria is part of a whole system, a global system that we all feminists, men and women, need to work together to bring it back to the right path to peace and security.
Thank you, Mariam. Suzan, تفضلي.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Yara, for the question. Yes. So if I talk about Iraq, I have to say Iraq has two different contexts. One, it is in general, when I'm talking about Iraq, but we have also the context of Kurdistan region. And there's also different between the two contexts. But if I talk about the shrinking civic space in Iraq, of course, increasingly affected on meaningful participation for women's peace actors. But if I talk like in early days, of course, women rights organizations, they played an active role as a government partner and other stakeholders. They were instrumental positioning Iraq as the first country in the MENA region of developing the first national action plan and publishing the first monitoring report on the implementation of the first national action plan. However, the situation has been changed and restricted women rights organization for their participation in key processes, like in consultation, in monitoring, implementation, and this has resulted in a clear gap in accountability and implementation. So we can see the challenges today. It is politics, gatekeeping, and restricted funding, and also the rise of risks on independent voices of women rights organizations. So unless if like they are affiliated in political parties. So this is a huge backlash on women participation and women involvement. And we know that all the resolution, the UN Security Council resolution, calls for the importance of having the meaningful participation of women rights organization in the development and in the implementation and monitoring. So to move forward, how to keep this civic space for a meaningful, not symbolic participation for women rights organization. Otherwise, we will lose the reality on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzan. Hala, we'll move on to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. So to complement my colleagues, I want to mention that what's happening in the gender and the women inclusion in the world, it's really echoing in our region. So just to give an example, we don't, what I want to say is that we don't only affect it because funding is cutting heavily and nobody wants to talk about gender equality anymore, but also because we needed the support to make our voices heard. And if I want to bring an example from the Libyan political process, what's famously known as Berlin process, women wouldn't be on the peace table if we don't have the international support, because when it was left to the national actors, they only chose one woman to be presented on the table with them. And that's when the UNSMEL, the UN mission to Libya, interfered and had to include more and more women, what they called the independent bloc. So without them, we wouldn't have been in the main political peace negotiation. Also because our process has, several tracks. Without the support of the American government at that time, we wouldn't have women in the economic tracks. The Dutch, we didn't have women in the reconciliation and the human rights track. So we really needed them, not only for supporting our work on the ground, but to make, to make our presence possible. Because if it was left to the Libyan actors, we wouldn't be on the table. We would be in a different structure. So I want to conclude that this backlash is very serious because it's reinstitute the patriarchal power dynamics of the region. And all of the progress that we've made when it comes to recognizing the work of civil society actor, women rights defenders, recognizing that we are at risk, that we need to, to have, safe spaces, it's all gone now. And I know that at least from my own country that people say, okay, it's happening in Europe and in the US. Why do you want us to protect you, or why you want to be heard if this has happened in the modern world? So this is quite a challenge. We're still at the shock phase at the moment, so we don't know how to respond. But I'm sure that maybe with this discussion we can give more. Yeah.
Thank you, Hala. Dalal, we're moving on to you, please.
Well, thank you very much. And I apologize for not being there with you physically. And I must start by thanking all the organizers and the speakers. I'm really thrilled to be with such a great lineup. Since we are in March, I need to start by saying that usually in March, the world celebrates the resilience, the leadership, and unwavering commitment of women around the world in shaping the political and diplomatic landscape. Yet, unfortunately, for women in the Arab world, whether from Sudan to Libya to Syria to Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, Palestine, Unfortunately, this day also is a stark reminder that our struggle for inclusion is very much intertwined with our struggle for justice, for dignity, for freedom and self-determination from different kinds of military occupation or settler colonialism or different conflicts that are being imposed on us. So on International Women's Day, and as we commemorate 1325 and the WPS agendas and the quarter century of the Beijing Declaration, I really want, as a Palestinian, to thank UN Women and all the different international organizations and the Policy Studies Center that work to document and report the sufferings of women all around the region, but specifically in Palestine, and to remind the world that the root cause of the sufferings of the Palestinian women actually lies in the Israeli military occupation that is very much prolonged and needs to end. When we talk about the Israeli military occupation as a root cause, I must also come back to the data, where in the past 16 months, the Israeli military machine had murdered more than 13,000 Palestinian women in Gaza, 1,000 in the West Bank, and yes, 140,000 women were widowed or left abandoned without any caregivers, and 50,000 Palestinian women pregnant had to give birth in very dire and inhumane conditions. You know, data also showed that 70% of the victims of the Israeli military fire were basically women and children. You know, those are not just numbers. Those are the stories of, you know, Hind Rajab, the stories of Shireen Abu Akleh, our mothers, our daughters, and our sisters, and leaders of our communities, whether in Gaza or the West Bank, who bear the brunt of war, yet they continue to hold our community together as they are rising from the rubble. I also want to reiterate that, you know, the genocidal war that we have been witnessing in Gaza also has a parallel of, you know, Israel's systematic war in the West Bank. If you look at the West Bank from Nablus in the north to Jenin, to Tulkarem, to Tubas, to Qalqilia, to Ramallah, to Jericho, to Hebron, to Bethlehem, and to Jerusalem, every Palestinian city is under attack, and every Palestinian woman suffers on daily basis from different racist policies, extrajudicial killings, detentions, settler terrorism, and recently the forced displacement policies have been intensified. So when we look at all this reality, it is precisely because of those facts and the realities that are being imposed on our grounds and that cause the immediate sufferings of the Palestinian women that we need women at the tables. When we look at the Palestinian women participation when it comes to negotiating ceasefire, when it comes to even the ideas of, you know, even trying to think about the reconstruction of Gaza or reconciliation, for example. And I'm not talking about the conflict context with the Israeli side. Even on the intra-Palestinian level, unfortunately, scarcity of Palestinian representation, or if I may say, zero Palestinian women representation at those levels of negotiations and of political talk. That's why I hope today that this panel will actually, you know, serve as a catalyst to move forward the talk and the need to have more women at different tables. Not because now women are not, you know, the inclusion should not be looked at as a luxury, but it is a necessity. When we look at, you know, what happened in Gaza in the past 2 years, we are reminded that unfortunately diplomacy and multilateralism failed the humanity in Gaza. Today, it is men who had waged the war. It is men who are negotiating the ceasefire. Unfortunately, it is the women who are expected to rebuild the societies and bring the people together and to continue to show resilience and, you know, steadfastness on the Palestinian streets. I'll stop here now until we go to the second question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalal. Thank you all for these insights, and I think you highlighted many of these critical challenges. Maybe I'll just reflect a bit on those that were identified as part of the working group, the WPS working group. So a lot were mentioned by you, and maybe I'll add some more. So some issues that came up was the growing resistance to the WPS agenda, the narrowing of civil space that means that human rights offenders and activists face more threats and restrictions than ever before. It was highlighted that women remain excluded from formal mediation and decision-making processes. Another key issue was that the Women, Peace and Security agenda doesn't fully address the unique challenges faced by women under occupation specifically. So that's a bit lacking there. With issues like land confiscation, political suppression, arbitrary detention. This all makes it harder for women to engage in the peace-building process. Another challenge which was identified, and I think, Suzan, you mentioned it too, is the funding. Sometimes more so, it's the donor-driven priorities that tend to shape the WPS agenda set. Many mentioned that the action plans that are put sometimes lack accountability and resources that make its implementation inconsistent. Others also mentioned the importance of strengthening the intergenerational alliances and making space for local voices in order to move forward with this agenda. So it's clear that while some challenges have evolved over the years, many of the core struggles women peace actors faced when addressing women peace and security are very much still present today. So now our question is how to address them in a practical and sustainable way. I'm going to turn to you, Mariam, with my question. As a co-founder of the Syrian Women's Political Movement and a long-standing advocate for women's inclusion in peace and transition processes, how do you view the development in Syria now for women? And from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that remain for women seeking leadership roles in political transition and reconstruction? And how can the WPS agenda help ensure that the Syrian women are meaningfully, not just included, in a meaningful way in the decision-making at all the levels?
Thank you for this. Thank you, Dalal, for addressing very, very crucial issue in how we cannot have peace, women, and security until we address it at all levels and look into human rights not as divisible and as double standards in our assessments of women, peace, and security. Going back and focus on Syria, after the fall of the regime in Syria, the country that has been inherited is in shambles. There are 75% of the infrastructure of the country is destroyed. The average, the income, or not income, the income of the average income is between $20 to $30 a month. That puts 95% of the Syrian population under the poverty line. So when we're talking about women, peace, and security, it's the same thing like when we're talking like about it in Palestine, we're talking about it in Libya, and talking about it in Yemen, talking about it in all of these different spaces where are ridden with conflict, is that you cannot have an equal and meaningful participation if you're worried about sending your child to school, if you're worried about putting food at the table, if you don't know if your parents are sick, your family is sick, somebody is hit, and we can imagine in conflict the amount of injuries and the amount of damage that happens to the population. When we're thinking about these issues, it is very difficult for us to think about how do we meaningfully participate. Therefore, it is very important that the actors, the very few actors that are on the tables, that are in decision-making, that are feminist, whether men and women, especially women, that we support them, that we stand by them, and that we make sure that they get the word across. We have very few women now within the Syrian context who are doing this job, because if we look at the nature and the realities on the ground in Syria, just like everywhere else, I don't want to say, the Syrian government is very different than the US government right now, or the EU governments, when you sit, like for my experience here at the UN, when I'm sitting at Security Council, meetings, at GA meetings, and I'm looking and you see it mostly like during UNGA, actually, when like UN General Assembly happens, it's mostly in suits, it's men everywhere, everybody's sitting. The highest number of women that was like from my remember in the last 14 years working like with Security Council, it was 4 women, Security Council permanent representatives that was in the room at the same time. So we need to think about these issues and think about how the few women that are included, like the organizations that are on the ground, the women like that we have right now, that are working within the government, that we support them, that we are standing by them, that we're giving them all of the tools and all of the possible support, whether it's, technical or financial or in any way like access to resources, access to power and power sharing spaces so that they can do their job, that they can do their work. And I do want to add something, but maybe I'll add it to the next question when it comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. Suzan, Iraq has made strides in developing 2 NAPs on WPS, yet operational barriers remain. So what are the biggest challenges to the implementation and how can they be overcome? And do you think government-led NAPs are effective in driving forward the WPS implementation at the national level, or do you think another implementation mechanism perhaps should be explored?
Iraq government and Kurdistan region government, both, they have taken very good steps on developing 3 national action plan in reality, because the third, it is in a process of endorsement. And also many strategies and very important law, which in regard to survival law in Iraq, which has been endorsed in 2023, which is very remarkable achievement for women, peace, security agenda. But, and also when we are talking about Iraq and Kurdistan region, so they were the first who committed to the women, peace, security agenda. But of course, there's many operational barriers that hinder the effective implementation of the National Action Plan and the translation of the women, peace, security agenda on the ground and for the benefit of women's rights, women's participation, the most importantly. Because if we talk about women participation and to have women's perspective that affecting and influencing, changing the laws, the legislation to protect women's rights. But we are living in very contradictory situation. We have 3 NAPs, we have strategies, we have the survival law, but on contradictory way, we have like refusing to the approval, the passing of the domestic violence law. So how to protect women's rights, how to achieve women peace security with having all the domestic violence. On another hand, that the amendment of the personal status law. And the strange thing that with all the efforts from women movement, civil society that want to stop this amendment, to reject it, and this has already started since 2003. And every time just we are trying to stop this amendment till it been passed. And the strange thing when we are looking at, we have a very good women participation in Iraqi parliament, 97 women inside the parliament. And they are against the passing the domestic violence law, and they supporting the approval of the amendment that legalized child marriage for women and polygamy. So this is how we are achieving the women peace security agenda. So there's this contradictory on having on a way many plan strategies, but it remains symbolic. It is far from reality. So this is a big issue that happening. So how we have to translate the women peace security agenda on the national ground, how to understand what it does mean and what is the plan, national action plan does mean, and how women can benefit from, and how to have meaningful participation for women. Why women they are there? We have quota, but quota been misused by political parties. So there's no women that going there with a feminist perspective to be there to fight for women's rights. They are fighting for their political parties with a political agenda. So how, and this is the consequence. So this is why we are reaching this moment of this huge backlash on women's rights. So, and in addition to other challenges, like for example, lacking of political will. Without political will, how to allocate budget to fund all the programs designed in the NAP, how to localize them, how to not only to have a plan for 4 years, 5 years, but how to translate it to annual plan, to be easy to be implemented, to monitoring it. So this is very important. We are happy about the ownership of government, of the leadership of government on developing NAPs, on consulting with civil society. But again, we need more how to create this political will on the implementation, on the monitoring of the NAP, and how women can exactly benefit. We have all the survivor, Yazidi women, from the conflict. We have children that born from the conflict, from rape, from forced marriage. So what is the how they can get access to justice, to reach their right? Instead to be busy to respond to them, we are amending the personal status law, but not thinking about all the survivors. So this is how it making me what to say about the achievement of women, peace, security agenda, how women, survival women benefited from the 3, or at least to say the 2 national action plan, even the special law that came to respond to them. And even we can see there's no reparation in the law itself. It is only something to subsidize with salaries like this, and again with very difficult process to prove if they are victims of the conflict. And on the top, then it comes the shrinking space of civic space, women rights organization, and the risk of the independent voices. So again, it means you don't have the spaces to criticize or to monitor. So how, if there's no accountability, no monitoring, so what is the indicators? And again, we can see still, because the core, the separate of women, peace, security agenda, it's about women's meaningful participation. But if still women, they are not involved in peace agreement, in peace reconciliation, they are only doing like, I'm not talking about everyone, but I'm talking about the majority. It is a symbolic rule, and this is with this symbolic rule, we cannot achieve an effective like women, peace, security agenda. I don't know if I have more time to talk about.
Maybe I can just ask you, so you're mentioning this and you're saying it's a symbolic representation, but how do you suggest, given that, yes, you are happy it's government-led, but how can we move it forward? So what's needed to make it more actionable?
Yeah, as I said, yes, government, they are there, and this is because the National Action Plan, it is the responsibility of government, and they are leading on this, and this is very good step. But also for government alone, they are not able to implement the agenda of women, peace, security. So it needs everyone to come to support the implementation. So the international community, how to support, and also civil society to be there, because also important that everyone, when working together, so at least there will be a bigger impact on the agenda. So this is that we need how to come together, to work together, and to have effective implementation of this women, peace, security agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzan. Thank you. Well said. Hala, in the context of Libya's ongoing political instability, what opportunities exist for women's involvement in reconciliation and governance, and what support is needed on the ground to enhance this inclusion?
Thank you, Yara, for the question. I know that many of you are not familiar with the Libyan context, but I just want to say that I'm not really in favor of the term national reconciliation in Libya, because the process, if you read into details, it's not a national reconciliation. It's a process to form a new social contract and state building, and that's why it's more crucial to have women in the process. The reconciliation is part of it's a pillar of this process. Having said that, I want to say that women are not present at all in this process. Not in the consultations, that there is no consultation with women ongoing. When the government or the presidential council formed a vision, women were not part of this process as well. When the HUR or the House of Parliament issued the legal frameworks to govern this whole process, women were not consulted. On top of that, the whole process does not see, it doesn't have the victims as heart of the whole process. Also, that it does not recognize that women were victims in this war. So you can see how it's exclusive, if I may say, it's the whole process in Libya. And if we, and sadly, I mean, the whole process is governed by, supported by the African Union mission. But it's still, it really needs a lot of work to have a meaningful, inclusive for women. When it comes to governance in general, I mean, at the moment we have, as you said, political fragmentation, talking about governance and everything. It's considered, wishful thinking, but I don't see that women will have any meaningful presence. When you see the proposed legal framework for the election and everything, it's excluding women. So it's only having 6% for women quota in one of the Congress Council. They're adopting the zebra system for the parliament, but it only will give like less than 20% for women. When you see if the government, the current government in Libya had signed an undertaking that they will assign 30% women in the a governmental position, only 15 or maybe less has been assigned. And they were like, you should be happy that we did that. And that's Qatar Allah khair, now we say in Arabic. So this is the problem. I have to applaud the UNSMEL role. They have done a lot, maybe because it was led by a woman, and this is a feminist woman who was really trying to put a framework, and she forced all the candidate for the government to sign an undertaking. But when it comes to the national authority, when they are like now have the authority, they will do whatever they want, and this is an issue that we are suffering with, and we will continue suffer with if we don't have an enforceability and accountability in the whole process. Yeah, so I will leave the rest for my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Hala. Thank you. Dalal, given the ongoing severe humanitarian and political crises in Palestine, how do you see the role of the WPS agenda in addressing the specific challenges Palestinian women face? And if I can also ask you, based on your experience with the WPS working group, what potential do you see in leveraging regional spaces to advocate for Palestinian women's inclusion in decision-making? And how can these spaces contribute to strengthening the WPS efforts across the region?
Well, thank you very much, Yara. As I was just saying, unfortunately, men are negotiating the ceasefire on behalf of the Palestinian people, and women are expected to rebuild the society. So if we can imagine a place where women are actually, in fact, involved in the governance structures, in reconstruction of Gaza and the transitional justice also in the West Bank, the different mechanisms, the post-war rehabilitation processes, I think we would be in a much more just and equitable and sustainable place. Women, however, in Palestine are intentionally left out, I would say. They are portrayed as icons of victimhood, but however, not agents of change. Women are not really being treated seriously. I mean, you would see many leaders, male leaders in Palestine talking about and praising women as their mothers and their sisters and their daughters and the heroes of the Palestinian history. But when it comes really to political decision-making or diplomacy, for example, the representation of female diplomats in Palestine does not exceed 11%. We don't have even 15 of our ambassadors as females. I know that women in diplomacy representation worldwide is low. However, for Palestine, it is really sad, because when you look in our universities, the Palestinian women enrolled in universities make 60% of education in Palestine. So there is no correlation between the merits and the qualifications and the skills and the educational and practical experiences that the women in Palestine hold and what positions specifically in politics and decision-making that they hold in Palestine. So going back to the UN Security Council, the 1325 WPS agendas, which were established, and stress the need to have more women and full equal roles to maintain peace and security. Palestinian women, I want to repeat, that are intentionally and methodically barred from political leadership, decision-making, and post-conflict state building as well. You know, the international community has spent billions of dollars over the past 3 decades in Palestine. Unfortunately, and we have talked about this during our workshops, Yara and the others, I think UN Women and the international donor community need to revise and revisit the way they look at their funding conditions and mechanisms. I really hope that they will not go into déjà vu scenarios of trainings here and there, which did not really bear the fruits after 3 decades of experiences. We really don't need to repeat already tried experiences. I think we need to be more creative, more innovative, and not only by adopting, you know, the modern labels of AI, technology, and democracy and inclusion, without really, touching the fruits on the impact of those trainings. That's why I am advocating with the WPS agenda, and this was discussed already in the paper, that maybe we should revisit the training ideas. In Palestine, however, we also need to stress the point, which is also included in the paper, as Yara was mentioning, that we cannot neglect the root cause of the sufferings and the endurances of women, which is the Israeli military occupation. However, to elaborate, we need to understand that colonialism had actually enforced and entrenched the patriarchal system in Palestine. It had, in fact, militarized masculinity and pushed women actually outside of the leadership spheres. It gave an excuse to more masculine dominant society, where women have much more priorities under occupation and colonialism, instead of taking political roles, etc., etc. So when Palestinians are in constant survival mode, for example, against the Israeli system of repression and dispossession, Palestinian women are trapped. They are trapped in their own society system of patriarchy, in which they were never actually intended to lead or seen as equal when it comes to political leadership specifically. Palestinian women, because I don't want to sound pessimistic, in reality, Palestinian women are not survivors. They are not victims. They are the resilience symbol of the Palestinian people. And they are also the builders of the future and of the existing presence of our communities. So the leadership that the Palestinian women play in post-war reconstruction needs to be institutionalized somehow and not treated as an afterthought. That's why I hope that this dialogue and the working group will be the catalyst for change, not only for Palestinian women inclusion, but also for the Arab and regional and international women inclusion when it comes to political processes and moving forward, the leadership that needs to mirror, the pain and the sacrifices and the legitimate role for the woman when it comes in our people's quest for justice, whether for men and their children and the women alike. So if the world is really serious when they talk about their commitment to peace and security, and women also need to be protected and need to be empowered, and their resilience and their skills and merit need to be reflected in their roles in the societies, not only on social levels as caregivers, but also as decision makers on all levels. In Palestine, just to give you a couple of data, in our basic law in Palestine and in our, the Palestinian Declaration of Independence, 1988, the language is amazingly civilized. The language is amazingly secular. The language is amazingly inclusive. And it does really treat women on very much equal basis. And when you look at education, again, women are at the lead. When you look at the merits, the skills, however, when you look at the percentage of political leadership and participation, it is very, very, very low. And this cannot be traced back but to, unfortunately, the political will of the leadership. the patriarchal system that is very, very much entrenched. And I have to admit that the lack of democratization in Palestine, the lack of a cycle of elections did not also help the Palestinian women in taking the rightful places in decision making. However, I think now more than ever, after the genocidal war that was documented in Gaza and what we're witnessing up until this moment of settler colonialism and forced displacements in the West Bank on daily basis, I think there is hope and there is room for more women to be included. And I hope that throughout the working group, I am very, very, happy to be part of this group, because I am surrounded by not only powerful women, but smart women. However, they are the expert women in the field. And this is, I think, a lesson learned that we need to focus on. In our advocacy, we don't want all women to be included at different tables. We want the right women, like the right men, of course, at the tables. So we need to respect expertise and specialty. So when we see women who are working on this working group and this policy paper, who are really experts in diplomacy, conflict resolution, strategizing, peace, justice, mediation, and negotiation, this is what we should focus on. We don't want to advocate and to help the leaders in our countries just do the gender boxes checking, because this is what we had faced in Palestine as well. Sometimes when men advocate for increasing the percentage of women representation, for example, in certain agencies within the PLO or different government bodies, they do actually increase the percentage of women representation to sometimes 20%. However, the representation is not really comprehensive, and it's not reflective of the needed women in the right places. So I think we as women need to also focus on our expertise and to put the right people in the right place. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalal. Very, very well said. The right persons with the right skills, the right knowledge. Thank you, all of you, for the very thought-provoking interventions. We're going to wrap up this panel with a final question, common question, but also if you have any final thoughts that you want to add after you answer the question, I'm going to. So what is one concrete step or recommendation that you would put forward, whether to national governments, international donors, international or grassroots organizations, to accelerate the progress on the WPS agenda? Would you like to start, Mariam?
It cannot be one. I have to do two. Okay, two, because I need to go on an international level as a Syrian person sitting at a panel talking to the international community. I don't know how many people are online. I don't know how many people will hear this, but going through all of these amazing partners that we have, I do need to emphasize that without lifting the sanctions of Syria, we cannot really move forward. These sanctions, talking about them like politically and economically, I don't know, as a means of bringing down a regime, that's something to be discussed. But right now in Syria, these sanctions are holding people back, is holding the government back, is holding women back. Because if a woman, like I said earlier, does not have means to send her children to school, to put food on the table, to take care of her family, which is the role women usually do in society, she cannot have any way for her to participate meaningfully into the rebuilding of her country. That's number one. Please lift sanctions off, especially the sectorial sanctions that affect transportation, that affects the central bank in Syria, and that affect the energy production and oil fields and all of that, that feeds into the economy of the country, and bringing in investments. I know there are some sanctions that have been lifted, but the limited lifting and the temporal lifting does not bring investment, does not bring people to come in and go back. I am thinking, me as a person, if I want to go back to Syria, I want to have a school to send my children to. I want to have some kind of a healthcare that my children can be, part of. So if that doesn't happen, like every mother, like every person, like every father, we need to do this. That's number one. Number two, for the international community, also working in Syria, specifically like from a feminist perspective. And I want to reiterate a lot of the things that Dalal said. Thank you, Dalal, for addressing a lot of the things that I wanted to say about like this kind of funding. We need to invest in women, and we need to invest in local women. And one of the ways that has been done now with a lot of money being spent And the way funding is done is that you check marks, you check boxes, and you need to have all of these MELs and these reports and all of this stuff. We need local women who are really doing the work on the ground, who are doing like the national consultations, the national dialogue, the Syrian dialogue. You saw the eruption of violence that happened in Syria. And if this has been dealt with right away with the advice of the people who are working on the ground, and mostly women who are working on the ground, a lot of these issues could be prevented. A lot of these issues could be dealt with before. And therefore, it's very important that we let women design and lead a lot of these programs that we invest in on the ground. So lift sanctions up and put a lot of money into Syria that are in the hands of women.
Suzan, تفضلي.
Oh, every time I'm asked. As a woman rights organization representative, I want to highlight the importance need for urgent support to recognizing women rights organization, not just as implementer, but as a strategic partner in shaping peace, security, and equality agenda. I call the international community, international agency, how, if they clarify for us how they will remain to address the shrinking civic space and how to making sure about the sustainability of women rights organization and in a decision making, like we have the knowledge, the context, the national expertise, the solution, but we need the space.
Hala.
Thank you. So also my recommendation is for the international community. And it's actually a takeaway from a paper that I've just finished with. I prepared for the Arab CSO Feminist Network, and I think there is. I mean, now in development and there is like some sort of reform is happening and changes, and I think it's very important to admit that the WPS agenda is not working, right? So yeah, and to truly and effectively to make this work, this agenda works, we need to include enforceability. We need enforceability mechanism to hold parties accountable when they are not meeting the targets of the WPS agenda. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything on the ground. And this, I say it, our research paper, I analyzed Security Council resolution for and the NAP for Palestine, Sudan, Libya, and Yemen. And it was heartbreaking to see how there is a lot of gaps, you know, even in the Security Council resolution that they don't see and they don't include important things. So I think this is very, very important. Also, from the Libyan experience, I would say that the international community, at least in our region, tend to have a approach for power sharing arrangement when they're talking and mediating for peace. And this is not helpful for a long term. And we can see, we're doing it now in Libya, and we can see what's happening in Lebanon. And we can see it doesn't really work in the long run. And it's not helping women. Because women, that's why we don't have meaningful participation that Mariam and Dalal were alluding to. It's not there because of this power sharing mechanism. So somehow the international community need to be more innovative, and they should come with maybe a responsibility sharing arrangement where it's people centered rather than it's, you know, enabling spoilers arrangement. So I think this is very important. And my very last comment, because I was very brief in my other intervention. I think it's very, I mentioned that when the UN mission in Libya was led by a woman and she was a feminist, we had better framework to our peace. And She's not there anymore, unfortunately. We have a new woman. Stephanie is not there. We have a new woman. We're hopeful that she will follow the steps of Stephanie Williams. But we need more women or men who are having a feminist perspective and who can push, you know, the WPS agenda for real. And yeah, for here I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Hala. Dalal?
So what do I recommend? I recommend that we need to walk our talk. And this is a message for us as women in the Arab world, but also for the international community who had been issuing resolutions and, you know, different agendas and protocols. This is a very much constructive criticism, I hope, to the WPS, to 1325, and to UN Women as they are convening on different events right now. It is time we enforce, we implement the peace agenda. It's about time we stop talking about it and we move into implementation phase. Women should not be treated only on an advisory consultative roles, and not as beneficiaries, as business as usual, but as the architects of how we shape the political landscape. Another note, the double standardization. We should not tolerate more double standards coming from the international community. For example, when Palestine asked for investigation missions to come and investigate the gender-based violence against women, rape, etc., misbehavior, inhumane behavior for Palestinian detainees in the prisons, or whether on checkpoints and on daily life, the mission was not allowed to come to Palestine. And the UN Women did not pay enough, you know, power, if I may say, or pressure on the Israeli military occupation regime to go and translate their mandate, which they were brought to life for. And my last point is that, yes, we need to walk the talk. However, I am very much optimistic to be working with this working group with so many, you know, powerful women like yourselves on the panel. And I just shared another article this month with Afkar, the Middle East Council for Global Affairs, and another one with the Assam Faris Institute. We need to keep pushing. We need to stand together always. And that's how I think we will demonstrate to our generation and to the younger generation how when women are brought together at those tables, this is the way forward, and that's how we can bring the change desired to our societies, to our region, and to the world, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalal, and thank you, ladies, for all the recommendations put forward. I'm sure many of them will be incorporated into the white paper, and I also invite the audience to take a look at the recommendations that were set in the white paper shared today. We're going to move now to the Q&A session. I'll ask you please to be as precise as possible. Introduce yourself, please, before you pose the question. And if you want it to be addressed to any of the panelists, if you can specify that.
Hi. I don't think. Okay. Right. Thank you so much. My name is Salman Nims. I am a member of the Jordanian Women Union, and I am a member of the Women, Peace and Security Arab Group, as well as an expert on women, peace and security. Thank you so much for a very inspiring panel. You are inspiring women, each one of you, in your struggles, in what you've been doing. And I think what the last comments that all of you has brought in is what we were talking, we are sending to the international community. And I think if we want to push this forward, I feel like all the ideas you are saying are stuck with a ceiling. Because at the national level, we are unable to move forward with this because where the dynamics are happening are beyond our national level. This is the reality. It means nothing, even as a powerful woman, to be participating at the national level in a disempowered nation. Within an authoritarian regime, when the authoritarian regimes are kept as long as they are serving a certain benefit at an international level, and suddenly they become not useful, and then they are able to be removed. And here I want to mention that we need to move the women, peace and security discussion outside the gender circle. We are talking about this in the CSW, talking about it in October in the women in the 13th. Well, this is not where it should be discussed. It should be discussed where it should be mainstreamed in the peace discussions, in the international frameworks and human rights discussions. So this disconnect is happening at an international level, in the international arena. And at the same time, it's not happening. In order to move forward with accountability and implementation, we cannot keep NAPs as standalone structures and frameworks. They have to be aligned with national sustainable development plans, in order to have the executive plans for the governments, the funding that is directed there, implementing that, same as the gender equality agendas. So this separation is not working, and I think this will help us. Only one last point, the sanctions. Yes, I think the sanctions were so used on Syria, yet I don't see it being used on Israel. And really, again, if we don't, and we're talking about a backlash on gender equality. We're talking about backlash on human rights activists, on feminists, Arab feminists. We are going to go backward if we keep seeing the word. Our men in our region are now attacking us that, you know what, feminist agenda, women, peace and security, why is this resolution has to be implemented when no other resolution relating to Palestine was implemented? So we cannot move forward if we are not supported by a strong international community. Sadly, I think as long as Trump is there, nothing will happen. A Black woman was sitting on the Security Council. You were talking about this, and she vetoed every resolution to support the Palestinian people. She comes, so again, we want the right women, we want them on the right table, and no more in separate tables. This is a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Naisa Schnauer. I'm also from the Women's Union, Jordanian Women's Union. I do not to repeat whatever was said, and I thank the panelists for their points and concrete examples and concrete talk about what is happening and the situations, because we don't want to euphemize what is happening. I think one of the things that we should work on, and especially as UN women and for the international community, is that in NAPS, many times, and in all of the stages, we keep talking about the numbers, and we merely restricting ourselves to the quantitative part. It appears in every time that the number of women sitting is not sitting on the table is not a real reflection on whether the women issues will be addressed, women needs will be addressed and met in the negotiations or in the process of working the strategies and implementing the resolutions. So the first trap that is being always holding everyone back is that relying on quantitative numbers and saying that, okay, so even in places where conflicts are not like emerging in the same way. The other thing is that I want to add to highlight something that Dalal mentioned. She mentioned that a lot of funding, international funding, has poured into Palestine and also a lot across the Arab region. But in Palestine and in the Arab region, especially relating to meaningful participation and meaningful representation in political levels and decision making and leadership, after the genocide against Gaza and the atrocities that have occurred, and with the halt of international funding, even on Palestinian civil society in particular, it appears and it's clear that these fundings were not to empower women for their political participation, rather to impose some sort of agenda and some sort of mainstreaming on how women's leadership should look like. يعني, for example, it is not to empower Palestinian women to choose to resist Israel. Rather, it was targeting, directing the civil society work and meaningful participation to be accepting the status quo, which is more dangerous for Palestinian women, and it doesn't reflect their meaningful participation. The meaningful participation of Palestinian women is to be on the table, is to be in the decision making, and also to resist and to participate in the entire process of self-determination and liberation from colonialism. The final point is, as we speak about peace and conflict resolution and security, we should not limit ourselves to the definition of peace as the absence of conflict, or separating peace from justice, because in this way we are limiting the efforts of even women to participate, because the international mechanism to find peace and to bring warring parties to table is about reaching a ceasefire or ending an emergence of conflict, and is not working on the structures of what brought this conflict into place in the first place. So these are the things that we should work on and focus on. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more and then we'll have some reflections. I think they already have the mic to someone.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hi.
Hello.
It's very loud.
Natasha?
I'm Dr. Radwa Turki from Egypt.
We'll answer these.
And I'm a feminist activist, a researcher, and very interested in knowledge production for sexual reproductive health for women. I had a chance to review the policy paper, and I have two questions in regards to the recommendations for NGOs, for local NGOs and community organizations, because I feel like there's a lot to learn from the experience of drafting this, and there's a lot to learn, for me at least, on a very grassroots, very local level. I was very interested to see that there is an inclusion of religious figures in the recommendation. In my experience, this has been very complicated. It's a very complicated approach, because religious figures are not always on our side when we talk about women and when we talk about women liberation. So I'm more interested to learn about why they're there specifically and what was the process of deciding this recommendation. And also a question about the fourth recommendation about including safe houses and legal aid for activists. And there's a lot of conversation about this, and it's very much needed, but we're facing a lot of struggle when it comes to funding. And when it comes to the priority for funding is not directed towards supporting activists and keeping them safe. So maybe I'm interested to also learn if you had strategies or further recommendations on how we can strengthen protection for activists and keep them safe, because it's more important than ever now. Thank you.
Would the panelists like to reflect on any of the comments given so far, any of the questions? Please go ahead.
I want to comment on what Dr. Salma, she said. I already mentioned that I said there is no synergies between the National Action Plan and the new amended law. So it comes contradictory, and also refusing the proposal of the domestic violence law. So this is, it means it not works together. The plan, it says something, but in reality, the law and legislation. I can give you one example. For example, in Kurdistan region, we have the combating domestic violence law. And this is when it's regulating or bordering the polygamy. But then they made a claim in the federal court. This is against Iraq constitution. So we have to also to allow for polygamy. So it means there is so what does mean that we have the NAP for women, peace, security agenda when there's no harmonies between the laws, the strategies, and the NAP. So I know we have to think about this. After 30 years of Beijing platform, after the 13 years of SDG, of 1325, 25 years. So, but why this backlash? What we achieved through all the years, and what is the accountability on all the platform declaration, where we are from this. So I think this is the responsibility for everyone, like international community, agencies, like international organization and local. We have to review ourselves, what is the weakness, and how to strategize ourselves to be committed and also to have some achievement. We can see all the promises on all the declaration on Beijing on 1325, what we achieved with the promises and who is responsible for this. What is the weaknesses and what is the new way to overcome of this? It means all what we did, maybe it worked a little, but not all of them. So we couldn't achieve what we planned for it. And on the top, this is 5 years we are going, there's a big pushback on this. So what's the reason? We cannot put the blame only on one side. We all sharing this, and we have together to review ourselves to see why this consequence, why we are going back, and why women and girls remain to be victim and remaining to face the violence in the countries. We know this is not specific for Iraq. All the other countries in the region, they are in the similar situation. And women in conflict, why this women peace security agenda on global level and on country level couldn't respond to women and girls. So we have to address this in order to be able, if this is the mandate for us and if we believe in it. I don't know, maybe it was more for me. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Would you like to jump in? Jenny, Dalal?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like, can I?
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to make a short remark on the inclusion of religious figures. I forgot your name, but I hear you and I know where you're coming from. And I know that we all aspire for a more liberated kind of political and civil realities in our regions. However, in the Arab world, we also cannot neglect the fact of the different societal and ideological backgrounds that bring our societies together. And a lesson learned from different experiences around the world about inclusivity. Unless we come to the point where we make sure that everybody is included, that everybody is at the table. You know, we're not only talking about gender here, we're also talking about ideologies, we're talking about, you know, color, backgrounds, geographical representation, and religious representation. I think we actually need those. We need everybody to be at the table to advocate and push together. Otherwise, unfortunately, those who are not included and who are not on board will definitely be the spoilers of our goals and our admirations for our societies. So if you just think about it this way, of how when you include everybody and when you make everybody part of the process of change, that's how we come to the change desired. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to build on what Dalal mentioned. I think it's very important to have this inclusivity, but also it could be toxic if you're just saying we welcome men on or tribal men on the to discuss women issues, religious men, name it, men in general, but then they will just want to dominate and they just want to enforce their traditional way or their gender norms. They're welcome. We should have this discussion and dialogue, but also we should not compromise the principles of what we are fighting for, right? And we should not sideline the human rights aspect or the women's rights just to have, an agreement or an accord between us and between those people who are actually, opposing these ideas. So I think it's a notion that it's been, all around whenever you discuss anything related to gender equality. But I think we need to approach it in a very sensitive way, because from my experience working on the ground, we are always just giving away women's rights just to make them happy, and they make them included, or to make them with us in this signing on this agreement or this. And this is wrong, because it's a short-term solution, and it will not work in the long term. So we really need to address this in a very, very critical way. And you mentioned the human rights defenders, and how, this is like, what you asked is $1 million question. Anyone would love to have to answer this, but it's very complicated, because it's easier if you are outside the country, or if you can flee the country. But if you're inside, you are working with your law enforcement, with your justice system. And most of the time, even when international community, from my experience of what I've seen, if they want to interfere, they will ask, this is a national security issue. You are not allowed here. This is our national security. And this is why I always advise young feminists and young activists like you need to be cautious, and you need to understand that this, what you're saying, you need very responsible, you need to be very mindful of what you're going through. Because when you are in default, nobody, even, you could be in a session like that, you will leave, you will be, abducted, and nobody will know about you. And even then the national community can't do anything. So really, it's very, very complicated. And if we want to solve this issue, we need to address the complications of this issue. It's easier when it's online, but when it's physical, it's very difficult. I'm so sorry that I didn't give an answer, but I just wanted to share my insight.
Thank you, Hala. And just to also mention that the recommendations that you're seeing and the executive summary, at least that we shared today, are still work in progress. So we'll be sharing something more updated towards the end of the year or along the course of the year. Should we take another round of questions? I think she already has.
Well, hello, my name is Jaana Hirsikangas. I'm the Executive Director of UN Women's National Committee in Finland. And oh my goodness, you magnificent women. This has been the the best session of whole CSW. And I think you should be in the conference room in a big plenary with 460 people. This is the most important topic. I'm so grateful for you. I've been emotional and all that. I'm so happy I understood that this is being recorded so we can spread the word and really get your knowledge and insights to other people as well. I'm so very grateful for everything that you have been sharing with us today. We, as a UN Women Finland, we coordinate a similar type of collaboration as you've been mentioning. Is it a Women, Peace and Security Task Force or the working group? Which one was it? Working group for you. So for us, it's a Women, Peace and Security Network, and it's a network of NGOs, researchers, activists, and so on. And I think everything that I've learned today is so valuable, and I think we should somehow look into ways how could we connect these different working groups and networks and bring all of us together, because this is what we need. We need to learn from each other. We need to know how can we learn from you and then educate our parliamentarians and our government officials and our civil society and activists and everyone, so that we can do absolutely everything that we can to support you in your very important job that you're doing. So I'm just reaching out to you and hoping that maybe something could come up in the future where we could collaborate and somehow try to first of all to learn from you and then to take it forward in our communities, because I'm sure that there's so much that we could do actually together. And I'm also asking if there's any way of having any of these speeches directly to our network and our activists, so that they can learn from you as a webinar. It would be really, really valuable. So if I can just get your contact details later on, that would be so amazing. Thank you so very much, and thank you for organizing, of course, because that's why we are all here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Okay. Hello, everyone. I would like to thank you for this amazing panel. I'm Nuran Aqrab, a cultural activist and a program manager for the Masaruna program implemented in the War for Arts and Development in Egypt. Actually, I have a question for the panelists and the audience of the meeting. How do you see the participation of young women in the decision-making process? As a young woman-ish, not that young, but yeah. Especially during the armed conflicts, where the context is already excluding women as an entire gender. What are your recommendations or actions toward inclusion of young women? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nina Lahoud. I worked for the UN for almost 34 years in 6 peace missions on the ground, and I've been involved in WPS for a long time. I share your disgruntlement and criticism of the lack of implementation. I wrote an article, a 55-page article, before the 20th anniversary that you can read with recommendations, unfortunately, none of which were to accelerate implementation, which were not implemented. I got a lot of feedback. But in that vein, I wanted to, responding to Moez's appeal for concrete information, and I really want to say that, you know, it angers me when I hear yet again another impressive panel, much less from the MENA region, of really articulate women. And then we have token one woman in each Security Council meeting, if that, of civil society, et cetera. And we're in a room of mostly women, like all the CSW and WPS discussions. So in terms of a strategic way forward, I wanted to humbly put out a couple suggestions based on all my experience, and I was backstopping a lot of the missions, so I worked a lot with the council. You have 6 months before the WPS 30th anniversary, okay? It's going to be the presidency Russia, but you have, for all of these, look at how many MENA countries are on the council, where you have monthly or tri-monthly meetings. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, Libya. All of them with either missions or special coordinators in the countries. All of them with UN country teams. So I would like to humbly put forth that I feel badly I have not seen your draft report, but if, and I know MENA region is very diverse, so sometimes it's hard to have overreaching, okay? So I acknowledge that. But if you could, as a working group, endorse for a powerful statement, even if you break it down by country, and you identify in the various sectors, maybe don't overburden, 2 priority short-term priorities, and you make an appeal to, in a letter to the Security Council, copied to all the country team heads and the pen holders. You have to remember, there's 1 or 2 pen holders, member states, for each of these countries on the Security Council. So you get them on your side, you know, and you propose that you come up with maybe as an adjunct to that, this set of recommendations by country with priorities. But then what we did in Timor, and I like to think I wrote the page for the global study on what we did, which was unique, that we got the country team, and all of you have country teams, and they have resources, and they have mandates on supporting women, that we had a gender working group, and we divided up the recommendations for lead agencies for each of those. So, and we had, as part of that working group, it wasn't just UN. We had civil society representatives and the country representatives. So all the constituencies were represented on each of the clusters of the action plan. And they met 3, I was a team leader at the time in headquarters, so I followed this throughout. And it was one of the most effective ways because 1, you get a cluster of entities that are responsible for going forth. So it's a nationally led, nationally espoused vision, but you galvanize the UN agencies in the country to help you support and push this forward. And then on a second level, you think of a proposal to the Security Council, also consulting with all your pen holders, get them on board. So you have 2 per country. You have special coordinator for Palestine, special coordinator for Syria. Then you have UNSMIL, UNAMI, et cetera. And you put forth, I think you should have a suggestion that the Security Council and the pen holders, you have an all-day session, an all-day meeting with them. And once you articulate this, put forth your recommendations to discuss this. And then it culminate in a meeting, a public meeting with the council. So what I'm saying is when you talk about how can we better implement, you've got to galvanize and strategize. How do you get the big international players on your side in the council, on the country team level, in the missions? And my experience with missions is if you put something to an SRSG or special coordinator, we want this, this, and this. If you don't have something that helps prod them that, oh, this is a general policy. We're doing this for everyone. We've presented this to 10 countries. They feel a little bit more empowered that, well, what are the others doing? Or so if you that's why I'm saying if you present it on a global, a MENA-based or, the conflict-affected countries within MENA, because you have 22 countries in MENA, it's big. But if you highlight those on the Security Council, just as a first step, as a pilot, I think it would be very effective. And I also proposed, I was invited to an Arab League conference in Abu Dhabi a couple of years ago, and I put forth a bunch of recommendations. And one is for MENA to actually spearhead an appointment of a WPS a special representative for the MENA region on WPS. And I also pointed out that when you looked at the UN system, there were very few Arab women. Now you had 2 Moroccans, now you have Sima, but it's shameful, even in the peace and security space. So I'm trying to say that you have all these voices, they're not heard by the right people, they're not heard in the right forms or sufficiently enough. And how can you galvanize the council, the pen holders on the council for each of the countries, the country teams who have resources, and somehow translate your working group or divide it up into countries, prioritize so you don't overwhelm them. You can have an excuse that this is just the pilot priority stage. We'll hammer out more midterm and long term. And then look at the page in the global study on Timor and what we did with the country team. And it really, we integrated the national stakeholders, the government, NGOs, and UN agencies for each cluster, for each gender related. And just one particular thing, I was involved when I was on loan to UNIFEM in 2003 when we were talking about the Iraq political parties draft legislation. And we found in many areas that when the political parties law allows the political parties themselves to appoint the women, they often pick women that are just going to espouse their line. It's not the power. So that might be one of the things you think of collectively about how might you rethink that thing. So there's a lot of recurrent, but to have the diversity, but there might be some overarching, 5 things on a regional level you could propose. Thank you. I'm sorry I took so long.
Thank you, no problem. I think we can take one last question and then we'll get some.
Thank you, Yara. It's Khanzad Ahmad, Secretary General of High Council for Women and Development in Kurdistan of Iraq. I'm very happy to be here and hear from these amazing ladies from Syria, Palestine, Libya, and Iraqi Federal. I'd like to clarify some issues which I think is very important to know about it. Unfortunately, there is a flashback for women issues in these countries, but as you know, there is an impact of the political issues, security issues in these unsustainable countries. And all these reflect all these situations have reflect of our plans. I'm talking about the NAP2 of Kurdistan region for WPS. It's the second plan for Kurdistan. Unfortunately, before, I don't know if it's clarified for you, we have our parliament, our legislations, our laws, and we have our executive power. In the legislation, there is many achievements for women. For example, the honor killing, domestic violence law, and a lot of things, achievements during the 1992 until now. On the level of the executive power, we have in the Ministry of Interior Department of Violence Against Women, and they are very active. There is a hotline for the women in the Ministry of Interior, this Department for Violence Against Women. So what I want to talk about the Women, Peace and Securities Plan in Kurdistan, and by the help of the UN Women, we can't talk about their role, how they support us financial and technical. There is a difference a little bit about the systems, political systems in these countries. For example, in Iraqi federal, there is 2 parliament, there is 2 legislations, there is a hope for better situation. We can be a very good model for rest of Iraq, and we can be supportive for the other countries, especially for Syria and what's happening in Syria. Hopefully there wasn't be any crisis, but if there is any things, we can be supportive for you too. Through the UN Women, and especially with the INGOs, and in the INGOs, especially with the GIZ, we prepare our plan for women, peace and securities. On the second one, on the assessment, which we did it by this first NAP of 3025, or Women, Peace and Security in Kurdistan. So there is a lot of things which we can work it for the women, and we be a good model for the other rest of Iraq. I'd like to talk about the role of UN Women. We are here in United Nations. I think we should ask them to support UN Women more. Really. If you compare it between the other agencies with the UN Women, they need support here too. And they are our main partner for our issues, especially for women, peace and securities. I'd like to, for the peace mediator, we have a great program with the UN Women. And we started with the peace mediators because in the delegation, we see men, they are delegated in they are representative of these delegations. Now we have our program, and we started with the UN Women to have the prepare women to be part of these delegations. It's very good positive issues or positive point in the KRG. There is a parallel of vision with the vision of United Nations, with the vision of international laws for the human rights and for the women rights, and for the recommendation of the vision. I hope if you see the report, how much it is great report, and we are prepare ourselves to make more achievements, and by collaboration, all the partners and all the stakeholders, and we'd like to have exchange the experience. We can make all this through the UN Women and INGOs. GIZ is one of the INGOs who participated for the planning the next plan 2 of NAP, and NGOs, of course, and all the partners they have their they contributed for the second one. I'd like to say to you, ladies, the future is for us, for women. Be optimistic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, for the sake of time, we're going to have to wrap up the Q&A. Any questions that you'd like to address? I'd like someone maybe to answer the question on including the young women and the process. Does anyone want to take that on? Yeah. Okay. So maybe we'll keep that for discussions later. That's fine. All right. So we're going to be moving to the closing remarks. I just want you all to just join us in applauding these amazing, amazing women. All right. And now it's my honor to introduce Mariam Siskar, Chief of the Sectorial Branch at the Spanish Agency for International Development Corporation, for her closing remarks, please.
Very good afternoon to everyone. It's both a privilege and an honor to give the closing remarks in this event, marking the importance of women, peace and security agenda, particularly in the MENA region, which is a region that is very dear to our heart in Spain, both because we share the Mediterranean and because we are blessed to have the Arab legacy in our history for many, many years. And I want to thank the organizers and the co-organizers, and especially UN Women, for this event and for inviting the Spanish Agency of International Cooperation. I have the pleasure to say that since barely a month ago, I'm no longer the chief of the sectorial department and the deputy director for feminist cooperation, because we have a feminist cooperation and we have a feminist foreign policy in Spain. I want to also thank, and as UN Women from Finland was saying, she said it very well, these very inspiring women. It's been fantastic listening to you, Mariam, Suzan, Hala, Dalal. You have very strong statements from very strong and brave women. It's not easy to be a human rights supporter, and I can imagine that in your country it's even more difficult, but it happens everywhere. So thank you for that. You bring very down-to-earth and precise recommendation, and you bring also, and I will use the words of Dalal, resilience, future, and hope for the region and for the world. Thank you also, Yara, for the very swift moderation, and to all of you, because you gave very good questions, and everyone was very committed with the event. As Moez mentioned, 30 years passed since Beijing and 25 from the Women, Peace and Security agenda. A great achievement in recognizing the specific impact of conflict on women and men, but not women only appearing as a subject of protection, but also protagonists of our own development from pre-conflict to post-conflict, including on the negotiation tables. Women, Peace and Security agenda has marked a hallmark for the Spanish cooperation for Spain foreign policy. We've been one of the first 10 countries to approve a national action plan on women, peace and security. In November 2007 was the first one, and we are now working on the third one. The agenda has been strengthened by our feminist foreign policy. We have a feminist foreign policy and a feminist cooperation as well. And this is based in 4 pillars, which is rights, resources, representations, and alliances. And how is this framed in the Women, Peace and Security agenda? I'm going to start with resources. We've been talking that we have to walk the talk. If we call ourselves a feminist cooperation, we need to show it with what we are putting of money here, no? So we are happy to say that since 2018, we have increased 170% the funding of ODA going to programs on gender issues. And what's the R of representation? Implementation of women, peace and security means more representation about women. And you talk about that, the right women, having the right women in the right places. And I want to tell you about, because I want to be brief, but I think it can be interesting for you. We have a program, which is a program called Ellas Más, for women political and economic participation. We have several programs in different countries with UN Women, but we also have with civil society in Jordan, in Mali, in Palestine, and in Lebanon. And we have here Lara Ferguson, which is the chief of the gender unit at the Spanish Agency of International Cooperation and in charge of the Ellas Más program. Is directed to civil society organizations in the different countries in which Spain has a country office, which is more than 30 countries worldwide. And it's also open for international organizations and for the government. And then we have the A of alliances. And since its inception in 2017, we have supported the network of women mediators in the Mediterranean. We have worked on the support and the creation and promotion of networks of women mediators with regional approach. And with these actions and the recommendations that you have given and what I've been telling you about the 3 Rs and 1A, no? Rights, resources, and representation, and the A of alliances, I want to close, but I want to close with a sentence from an Algerian philosopher, Albert Camus, that says that the only battle that is worth fighting is peace. And women, we have a lot to say about peace. we have led the most revolutionary and peaceful movement, which is feminism, and we have a lot to say about peace and security for all, men and women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mariam. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I really hope that, as Dalal mentioned, the session really does play a catalyst role in this purpose we have in our mission, and that we do see women as agents of proper change, like proper agents of change. Final thank you to Sarah Douglas and PIPSA, our wonderful partners at Young Women. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone.